Good morning, everyone. This is James calling. In today's video, it is about a dialogue between me and a few other netizens, including one American intellectual. This dialogue happened immediately after the Boao Forum for Asia speech by President Xi Jinping 2021. It's just a few days ago. And this dialogue lasted for 2 days. And it reflects the huge differences, the gigantic gap between the understanding of China, the understanding of Asia, even the understanding of the world between American intellectual class and Chinese intellectual class. Before I get into the details of this dialogue, I will tell you there are 4 people involved in the dialogue. One by the nickname, let's say Hollywood. She is an American intellectual. Then there are me, of course, from China. The other 2, also I think must have a Chinese descent, but which nationality I'm not sure. So this is the dialogue that directly written in English. I'm going to stick to the very original truth that's according to the word by word of the dialogue that's written on the internet. So basically, I'm going to read it for you. And after this, I'm going to make a few comments about the dialogue itself. But I think that's going to be 2 videos instead of 1, because this dialogue itself lasted for 2 days. So let's get right into it. This dialogue started from the first comment made by the American by the name of Hollywood. Let's start. I must say, an impressive speech from a thoughtful, introspective leader. I particularly like the concept of the new Silk Road as a green energy ideal and the importance of multilateralism and international cooperation. I am wondering, though, if President Xi Jinping will be moving away from the hegemony of Han Chinese centralism and adopting a more diverse outlook on the Asian continent instead of the One China mandate. Also, I think the stress on not promoting the arms race is an important one, although some people might find that the continuing funding of the Chinese military as a contradictory action. I'm quite curious on the specifics of the digital e-commerce Silk Road in addition to what the president thinks about the future of currency. If we consider that the ancient Silk Road was also a key factor in the exchange of philosophy, literature, religion, art, and cultural values, and not merely goods and services between many different nations, then how can the new Silk Road implement those ideals of multilateralism? And lastly, what will be President Xi's strategy in making peace with the neocon element of American politics who views China as a threat? I agree with the president that a zero-sum game must be avoided, but despite good intentions, much more complex to implement. Now here comes and there's a response from one netizen in the dialogue. by the nickname of a little cattle or little buffalo. So here's what he says. Funding of the Chinese military is not even half of that of the US. Measured by GDP, China is even among the lower spending countries. And as for the future of currency, it's digital too. And China, together with Russia and others, will quit the US dollars dominated payment systems. And that is what really scares the US government. Of course, he can't reproduce all the complexity of these topics in an 18-minute speech. Hollywood replied, well, I do believe the US has around 800 military bases around the world, and that could account for half of military funding. But it seems to me that China is building up a significant military presence in Asia, and I think this is the primary reason why the US is alarmed. In the history of the Asian continent, it appears every superpower that has ever developed a significant military presence eventually led to war and conflict. As far as I know, there has never been an exception to this rule. Despite that, funding for the Chinese military industrial complex might currently be half of US spend. That could significantly change in the next decade or in the era of post-President Xi. In my opinion, I view China's economy in a parallel position as the US in the 1950s to 1960s, before a significant portion of federal funding shifted to support the growing military industrial complex. I am wondering if this newfound military ambition has more to do with the old sentiments lingering from China's loss of territory at the turn of the century. I do think President Xi is sincere when he says China has no ambition for expansion or hegemony over other nations. But what about the generals and the ministers within China's government who appear to be pushing this military agenda with a possible ulterior motive for expansion? Now here comes oh no, she continued. I am wondering what will happen to Chinese investments in the US if China were to quit the US dollars dominated payment system. China dominates Hollywood funding, owns real estate in America, and are heavily invested in American startups. The Chinese and American economies are essentially interwoven. In addition, China is second largest holder of US debt. Won't quitting the USD payment system be essentially shooting oneself in the foot? In essence, playing a zero-sum game? Is it realistic for China to quit the USD payment system when they are actively also holders of USD? I also think of digital currencies, or rather stablecoins, as simply paper money being digitized. But I'm wondering what President Xi thinks about cryptocurrencies and the eradication of the currency system altogether for a credit-based system. Then chimes in another netizen by the nickname of QH, and he replied, I don't think the intention is to overthrow the petrodollar. US dollars are still widely used no matter what. The intention is to provide another option for international trade transaction for those nations that may decide not to use the US dollars, whereas to promote solidarity and ideology-free environment. The purpose, the proposed currency structure is similar to having a choice to open an account with another bank for your money. Most importantly is to avoid bullying sanction when ideological differences or conflicts occur. I came into this dialogue a little bit late because I didn't notice it. So now, and it's my turn to give a response to the lady. I said, "I'm glad you have listened a wise man talking and giving it a bit of thought of your own. I can also see your concerns about the current situation of the world. Indeed, we shall all spare a minute or two to see the world affairs as a whole that will eventually affect all our lives, no matter who you are and where you are. I share that with you. But there are two statements you made in your comments. I have to point out that they are not accurate, and the logic behind them were not correctly understood. First, I'm wondering though if the President Xi Jinping will be moving away from the hegemony of the Han Chinese centralism and adopting a more diverse outlook on the Asian continent instead of the one China mandate. This, I quoted her. This is a rather presumptuous, broad brush statement, ignorant of historic facts and hence its understanding. Hegemony is a word that carries the meaning of strong political intention. It is absolutely incorrect to use in the context of China's unique history. Han Chinese constitutes the majority of the Chinese nation is never the strategic pursuit of the Chinese government, but instead the result of thousands of years' development of the Chinese civilization. It is the heritage we are talking about, not hegemony, you intend to say. Secondly, one China policy is also, and rightly so, the reflection of such a long history of the civilization. Taiwan is part of China, is a fact to anyone with a high school level of history study, whether you like it or not. Just like we all know, the birth of the United States as a nation is the result of European invasion of the new continent, and hence the genocide of the native people. History is the truth, not someone's opinion. And the second point, I quote her again. It seems to me that China is building up a significant military presence in Asia, and I think this is the primary reason why the US is alarmed. Quote, quote complete. I'm afraid you have just put the matter upside down. Which one comes first? The 100+ American military bases surrounding China, or the rapid development of the Chinese military modernization? Whose military showcases its military might at whose doorstep? This, to me, is self-evident and of common sense. How you can get the logic wrong is a little beyond me. I hope in the future, before writing a serious comment on any of the public platform like this one, you should spend some time to verify your facts and organize your thoughts. Only then I will appreciate your contribution better. And then comes another response to her by Little Buffalo, and he says, 800 military bases around the world. That speaks louder than any promise for peace, doesn't it? China is in a defensive position against all this military power showcased by the US all around it. And then Little Buffalo replied to me, "Thank you for all your good explanations to which I mostly agree, but please be a bit less harsh on this Hollywood lady. At least she's asking for explanation instead of just pouring out hate against China like most others on YouTube do. She, by the name I assume, she is just a victim to all the propaganda going on in US media. That said, we all suffer from some sort of filtered information, don't we?" So immediately after his response to me, and the Hollywood start to reply to me. She says, "I wasn't aware my comment on YouTube would be graded and assessed by such an esteemed scholar as yourself. However, I must point out that the proliferation of the Han Chinese nationality only came into prominence in the last 100 years. Before the rise of communism, China was primarily under the influence of the Manchu nobles in the Qing dynasty, and many other different sorts of ethnic Asians lived in China, until Han Chinese communists seized power and pushed everyone else into exile, similar to what the Bolsheviks in Russia did when they seized power from the Christian aristocrat, uh, aristocrats. The majority of China now may be Han Chinese, but it wasn't always so. Asia is an ethnically diverse continent, and I think, as brilliantly as President Xi may be, his One China mandate is a reminder of the previous imperial dynasties that often invaded and attempted to assimilate other ethnic groups into one, as what is currently also happening with Uyghurs in China and continued denial of Taiwan and Tibet as independent and autonomous nations. Certainly, the genocide of Native Americans in American history was a sad chapter, which Americans don't deny. But I also think it is to China's strategic advantage to forego Han Chinese centrism upon the Asian continent, as it makes surrounding nations such as India, South Korea, Japan, and many others suspicious that China is quietly re-establishing its previous history of invasion and assimilation through its One Belt initiative. I also think, since China is surrounded by US military bases, it would be to their advantage to partner with the US in military exercises as opposed to appearing to counter their presence with the build-up of a new Chinese military industrial complex that is rapidly growing in number. I'm speechless. Let me continue. To me, it seems more logical that China use its soft power through art, literature, cinema, and other methods in order to influence other nations as opposed to making a show of its military force that is becoming a precursor to another Cold War era. China is an ancient and beautiful civilization, and it should remain that way. Should be remain ancient instead of falling into the trap of become a military power. I just wondering if this American lady has a mirror to see herself and her own country in it. And then she's not finished. Now she's responding to QH. She said, "You've said, I don't think the intention is to overthrow the petrodollar. US petrodollar, US dollars are still widely used no matter what. The intention is to provide another option for international trade transaction for those nations that may decide not to use the US dollars, whereas to promote solidarity and an ideology-free environment. Quote down. But such a system already exists with Bitcoin. Japan has already figured out the solution with Bitcoin Cash. In addition, many nations also barter trade with nations under sanctions, such as when South Korea traded Samsung mobile phones for oil with Iran. That being said, SWIFT is an outdated system that needs much updating. But I'm wondering if it is President Xi's plan to bypass the central banking system altogether in order to create a different international transaction, or will this payment system incorporate central banks? She really has no idea of how the Bitcoin works, and she cannot distinguish between the, uh, the real money with the sovereign backup, between that one and Bitcoin. She has no idea. And she dared to comment on the other people. Amazing. Okay, let me continue. And I replied to her, I'm sorry, I'm a bit harsh on you personally, but not so on your opinions. Your reply to me shows your American-centric or West-centric understanding of the world today. Your knowledge of Chinese history is so limited that I cannot even say it was distorted. I cannot discuss with you on the false information of historic facts because that would amount to my agreement to your claims. I wonder, where did you get your knowledge of the Chinese history? This is the age of information, and the world is much more connected, and knowledge is abundantly available. But it is up to the individuals to choose his or her sources of information and verify them with due diligence. I am afraid what you regarded as facts are 10,000 miles away from the truth I know. On the flip side, I will never claim I understand Americans better than the Americans themselves. Can you show the same respect on issues concerning China when you actually discuss them with a Chinese nationality? Or you just simply believe what you said above are all true? Then the little buffalo that replied to Hollywood, and he said, first, please let me tell you that probably 95% of what you have learned about minorities in China is a complete lie. To the contrary of what you are saying, China takes pride in being a multi-ethnic society, and minorities are not getting suppressed. On the contrary, many of the minorities enjoyed, and to a certain degree still enjoy to this day, some privileges over the Han majority. Let me give you an example. When the one-child policy was still in act, some of the minorities were exempt from it. They could have as many kids as they wanted. As about Tibet, it is a known fact the unrest in Tibet was forged by the CIA in 1955. It was later even admitted by the US to have been a measure to destabilize the the People's Republic of China. Most Tibetans I know, but I'll admit I don't know many, are perfectly happy with being part of China. From what they say, it's only a minority inside the minority that are against China. This can be said about Uyghurs and the Xinjiang province. The unrest stems from a minority among them, a radical group of religious and Turkish separatist extremists. Most of the Uyghurs are happy and proud to be Chinese. And Little Buffalo continues. So being surrounded by US military should be reason just to give in and bow to the threat? Because that would be the result of your suggestion. I think you don't mean that, but that is just what you said. There's no interest to partner with the US military from neither side. If there was no threat from the US, there would be no need to build a stronger military. Simple as that. And Little Buffalo continued. SWIFT is exactly the problem. It can be blocked by the US and its allies. But BTC or BCH are not the solution. Think about the right to create money as a source of state power. There will be a digital currency, which is already being tested in some cities today. Inside of China, we have more advanced payment systems like WeiPay, like Weixin Pay or Alipay, which are great because of their simplicity. The digital currency is more important for the international trade. Now, Hollywood answered to me. It is a fact the Chinese Communist Party painted the Qing dynasty rulers in a negative light, often demonizing them. Multiple academ, acad, academics, multiple academics from different organizations have actually come to a different contemporary consensus of the Qing dynasty, such as the Empress Cixi, who was responsible for opening China towards the West and integrating many technological and scientific advances, and not the monster that the Han Chinese communists have painted her in their educational system. Wonderful. I just don't understand where she got his uh, history lessons. But anyway, she continues. When she was ousted from her power and put to exile, so were many other ethnic groups, with Manchu nobles pushed out of China. Let's also remember that the Chinese Communist Party was responsible for humiliating, jailing, and torturing President Xi Jinping's own father, publicly humiliated him and raided their house and killed his sister. Mamma mia, oh, okay, I'm speechless. Let me continue to read. A political party such as this cannot be objective in the teachings of historical data or events. You cannot say that you understand more of Chinese history simply because you are Russian or Chinese, rather than someone else who has also studied history from an objective viewpoint, reading many different sources of information. Most Americans barely have a grasp of their own understanding of history. I would think Chinese and Russian people are not that dissimilar in that respect. Now, she really see her own images. No, she really see Chinese and Russians in her own images. I don't know. Let me continue. I, I replied to her immediately. First, I quote her sentence. Most Americans barely have a grasp of their own understanding of history. I would think Chinese and Russian people are not that dissimilar in that respect. Quote complete. I said, you have not only shown your limitation on historical issues, but also your ignorance bordering certainly on a total loss of self-consciousness. The quotation from your reply above says it all. Chinese people's understanding of their history is really distilled not just from the classrooms, but rather from the inherited way of life, such as but not limited to their language. Like all idioms in use today, having an ancient story that is special and inherently educational and served as a mirror to all Chinese from all walks of the society. Those idioms carries wisdom and lessons based upon historical events that happened in the past and become the uniqueness of the Chinese civilization set apart from any other civilizations in the world. Children learn to recite them from day one when they enter the school, from which they learn their ancestral way of living, thinking, hero worshipping, and how to distinguish the bad from the good. We also have holidays that have started since ancient times and are still alive and kicking, such as Spring Festival, Mid-Autumn Festival, Tomb Sweeping Day, Double Sun's Day, etc., etc., etc. Every single one of them is historical in essence. To be honest with you, many of them have a longer existence than the lifespan of the US of A. It shames me to think the way you do. If I were put into your position as an American and dare to come here, argue about history, let alone Chinese history, I am tired of pointing out the total bullshit of your so-called Chinese history. Your objectivity has been long lost since your childhood because that is why you guys believe in American exceptionalism. How laughable for a young nation of 244 years existence and has not been tasted by time comes out guns blazing to claim such unfounded self-congratulation and wants to be the teacher of the world. You, as individual, carry exactly the same trait like most other elitist Americans. You deserve no respect from me because the feeling is mutual and shall be reciprocal. My last advice to you, stop talking about Chinese history because you makes me laugh. And if translated into Chinese, you will make all Chinese laugh. And last but not least, don't judge people according to your own image. I don't take shit. People can see that. And then she replied to Little Buffalo. Dalai Lama says 1.2 million people were killed under Chinese rule. China disputes this. He also said 500,000 died by starvation under Chinese rule. Since the Chinese Communist Party also killed President Xi Jinping's sister, I think I would trust the account of the Dalai Lama over the Chinese Party, who engaged in a history of oppression and violence against the Asian people, including their own. Is it common in China to believe everything the government tells its citizens? I think, realistically, the Dalai Lama figure is correct. Otherwise, there would be more Tibetans in the population instead of 3 million today. Then immediately Little Buffalo replied to her. These claims are more than ridiculous. If 1.2 million Tibetans who have been murdered in the 1950s, there would have been nobody left. By citing such false numbers, you clearly discredit all of your claimed historical knowledge. Today, Tibet has approximately 3 million inhabitants, of which 90% are native Tibetans. That totally dismantles the Dalai Lama's false claim of a replacing of the native population by the Han Chinese. Today's Chinese government is supporting Tibet in conserving and reviving the domestic culture. By the way, the minorities actually do come out and say the life is great in China, and your media just doesn't report that. And he continues. You claim you have studied history from an objective viewpoint. I doubt that. In my opinion, there isn't even such a thing like objective viewpoint. But from what you have seen so far, it is clear that this claim is just simply ridiculous. You obviously have no idea of Chinese history, and you also have very little understanding of cryptocurrencies. BTC as a means of payment is just simply dysfunctional, and the acceptance of BCH is so marginal that it has absolutely no meaning either. BTC and BCH are based on wasting massive amounts of energy to create and maintain the security. That to me is not a solution, and neither is it to Japan, Russia, Iran, or China. And he continues. It is common in Hollywood to believe everything that Dalai Lama or your media says. I can see that you argue with I believe and I think. So there's really no substance there. Yeah, during their conversation, this period of time, I was out of the house. So basically, this period of time, it's she and him. And now she continued replying to little buffalo. And she said, well, it seems to me that China appears to be weaponizing Bitcoin, knowing how much wealth is concentrated there. Sorry. Wealth in Bitcoin. Mamma mia, that's in casino. In my understanding, Bitcoin is equivalent to the chips in casino, but she regarded it as wealth. But anyway, let me continue to read. The majority of Bitcoin miners are located in China, and all China has to do is control the energy supply to them in order to control Bitcoin. And through this, they can control the wave of capital from the US and also of sanctioned nations. Considering a significant portion of the US revenue capital, a significant portion of US venture capital groups have invested in Bitcoin. In Japan, BCH is quite ubiquitous. They are way ahead of other nations in crypto payments. I have to clarify that I am not personally a proponent of cryptocurrencies. However, I think we are getting away from the main point of this discussion. President Xi Jinping is in an extraordinary position right now. As someone who came from humble beginnings to witnessing firsthand the violence and cruelty his family endured during or under the Chinese Communist Party. President Xi Jinping has already transformed China by nearly eradicating poverty, diversifying its energy strategy, and launching a new Silk Road. However, he must be aware that to move forward in his plans, that he must also heal ancient wounds of post-imperial Asian people. And if he wants to unite the Asian continent with his Silk Road plan, I believe he must rectify the wrongs of the past and make Tibet, Taiwan, Hong Kong independent nations that to reinstate the history of China's great imperial empires by focusing on the promotion of art, film, literature, music, architecture, not merely STEM, and to support the creative people who utilize design thinking who reside in China. Because what we always remember about the nation is ultimately its art, literature, architecture. I think she should lecture this one to her own country. That's my comment. In addition, a simple gift of giving the Diaoyu Island to Japan would make Japan so much more favorable to China's policies and create a renewed trust in diplomacy. And yet, China continues to stubbornly insist this inhabited island or uninhabited islands are theirs. Dear Miss Hollywood, why don't you tell United States to return the land to the native Indians and go back to where you originally come? Says such as go back to Great Britain, go back to Europe. I will sing hallelujah. But anyway, let me continue to read her ridiculous comments. What little price to pay to win the trust of the Japanese people? Same to you, Miss Hollywood. What a little price to pay to pacify the whole world from the threat of American over 800 military bases all over the world. And she continues. A focus on the development of a Chinese military-industrial complex will ultimately hinder China's revival of the Silk Road plan, and I really hope that I will be able to witness it in its full capacity in my generation to see how President Xi Jinping united the global world not only through the Silk Road but by its magnanimous actions in giving independence to the minor Asian nations of Tibet, Taiwan, Hong Kong, creating open borders, preserving the ethnic populations of China, shed its land grab reputation once and for all, and not be sidetracked by the build-up of another military-industrial complex which will inevitably launch the world into another Cold War. She sounds like a saint. She really can't see them. I think she must have no mirrors in her house. Or probably she doesn't understand what does mirror means. Let me continue to read. President Xi Jinping has a great responsibility ahead of him, and I hope he will unite Asia instead of building up a military-industrial complex that will only lead to more Cold Wars. And now, she turned her attention to me. I never said China doesn't have a rich culture and a complex and beautiful language. However, it is different from the education and state propaganda. The Han Chinese communists rewrote history to vilify the Qin dynastic period, while simultaneously erasing their reign of terror and violence. I think it is important to see one's nation from outside it, to fully understand one's own history. Oh well, I'm a Chinese, so probably she will agree with me. The United States is an evil empire because I'm outside of the United States. Same logic. Let me continue. To err is human, to forgive divine, and it is only the strong who recognize their wrongs. Okay, I'll agree. That being said, I do believe you are a little drunk. Otherwise, as an esteemed scholar, I would think you would be more charming and affable instead of resorting to petty insults about Americans. Oh well, I was absent at that moment. Okay, so the dialogue continues without me. So that's Little Buffalo replied to her. Tibet, in majority, doesn't even want to be independent. They are quite happy to be Chinese. Taiwan is de facto independent. Hong Kong is also independent, although the Hong Kong government is the mainland's sock puppet. Other than that, China is not even interested in changing the status quo of Hong Kong. So now I come back. I came back from whatever errands I was doing. I saw it. I replied to her. You must be feeling like a saint to write down these words. To urge the human, to forgive divine, and it's only the strong who recognize the wrongs. Do you recognize your wrongs? Or you simply believe whoever disagree with you must be wrong? And then I quote her again. The Han Chinese communists rewrote history to vilify the Qin dynastic period, whilst simultaneously erasing their reign of terror and violence. Quote complete. Really? Was your soccer coach who taught you the history of China? Or is it simply your way of politicizing everything about China? Or simply you are on a self-appointed mission to teach Chinese about Chinese history or Chinese themselves? You are really one of those typical ignorant and yet fearless Americans. Oh, by the way, I did not insult all Americans. As a matter of fact, I have quite a few American friends. If you feel insulted, I'm afraid you have brought it upon yourself. Then I quote her again. I do believe you are a little drunk. Otherwise, as an esteemed scholar, I would think you would be more charming and affable instead of resorting to petty insults about Americans. Quote complete. And I answered, would you be charming and affable to someone who throws insults at the first place, and to your mother then, and her people? I think not. You and you lot have been bad-mouthing China for too long and getting quite comfortable without facing much of a challenge in the past. Wake up, man. This is the new year, and today is different from yesterday. If you want respect, you must show your respect first. Nothing comes out from nothing. And this is the end of the dialogue. She never comes back to me, to none of that's counterparts that's involved in the dialogue. She disappeared. And tomorrow, I'm going to spend 10-20 minutes to analyze, to comment on this whole dialogue. Today, the video is a bit long because I don't really want to break this dialogue into two parts. And thank you everyone for watching. And if you want to comment, you're more than welcome. I will see you in next video. Bye now.